The Sunflower Showdown is the name given to the rivalry between Kansas and Kansas State across all sports. While Kansas State is the dominant force in the football rivalry, Kansas has held the historic edge in the basketball version. These in-state rivals have done battle on the hardwood for over 100 years, as the game is the most played series for either school and the sixth most played in the history of the NCAA. We'll take a look at the ebbs and flows of the rivalry between the Jayhawks and the Wildcats on this episode of Stadium Rivals. On their home court in Lawrence, Kansas met Kansas State for the first time on January 25, 1907. Kansas came away with the 54-39 win. Kansas State would get revenge just over 2 weeks later, winning 29-25. The contest remained evenly matched until the 1930s, with Kansas holding a 32-27 edge heading into the decade. Starting with the first game of the 1937-38 season, Kansas began one of their biggest runs against Kansas State, ripping off 22 straight wins from 1938 to 1947. K-State would end the run on February 20, 1947, with a 48-45 win in Manhattan. But the 1950s would be where the rivalry began hitting its stride. Kansas State reached the title game in 1951, and KU won the national championship in 1952, but the rivalry would heat up with the additions of Bob Boozer at Kansas State and Wilt Chamberlain at Kansas ahead of the 1955-56 season. Finally allowed to play on the varsity squad, Chamberlain led Kansas to a 91-86 win over the Wildcats in January of '56, but Boozer and K-State would bounce back with a 79-68 win in March. Chamberlain would lead Kansas to a Big Seven conference title before losing to North Carolina in the title game of the 1957 NCAA tournament. In a matchup that would become a classic the following season, Boozer dropped 32 points to lead number 4 KSU to a 79-75 double OT win at number 2 KU. K-State won the league and only conference champs were invited to the NCAA tournament, ending Wilt's college career. Boozer would lead Kansas State to a Final Four appearance in March of '58. After Boozer and Chamberlain left the program, star power was severely lacking from the Kansas-Kansas State rivalry through much of the '60s and early '70s. That changed in the early part of the 1980s, first with Darnell Valentine at KU and Rolando Blackman at KSU. It would grow even more with Danny Manning at KU and Mitch Richmond at KSU starting in 1986. Even the coaches on the sidelines were big names, Lon Kruger at K-State and Larry Brown at Kansas. Richmond and Manning would have intense battles in their senior season of 1987-88. Richmond tallied 35 points in a 72-61 win in the first matchup, ending Kansas' 55-game home winning streak. Kansas would win the following game in the regular season, with K-State getting the better of Kansas 69-54 in the Big 8 Conference Tournament. That wasn't the last of those battles. The teams met in Michigan on March 27, 1988 in the NCAA tournament with a spot in the Final Four at stake. Manning scored 20 points in that game as the Jayhawks topped the Wildcats 71-58 in their national championship season. The ascent of Roy Williams to the head coaching job at Kansas in 1988 was matched by the decline of the K-State program. Williams' record against the Wildcats was 50-6 until he left the program in 2003. But from the 1993-94 season until 2005, KU won 31 straight games over K-State, the longest streak for either team in the Showdown. K-State would end the streak with a 59-55 win in the school's first matchup in the 2005-06 season. With Bill Self firmly entrenched as Kansas's head coach, KSU needed a jolt and got one from Michael Beasley. KU came into the first matchup in 2007-2008 at 20-0 and ranked number 2. Beasley scored a game-high 25 points to lead the Wildcats to an 84-75 win. The first game between the schools in the 2009-10 season was an instant classic. KU came into the game ranked number 2, with KSU at number 11. In a game that went to overtime, K-State's Jacob Pullen scored a game-high 22 points, but it was Cole Aldrich in Kansas that pulled out the 81-79 win. The newspaper The Wichita Eagle later claimed that the rivalry was back. However, Kansas would win the next matchup in the regular season and again in the Big 12 tournament. With Kansas holding the all-time edge of 196-93 ahead of the games in 2019, this doesn't seem like much of a rivalry. However, from 1945 to 1977, the conference title came down to either Kansas or Kansas State. The Big 12 seems to run through this rivalry, one of college basketball's best, and perfect for a spot on Stadium Rivals.